wise to ratchet down the expense side of the ledger as closely to what you need to operate as you possibly can. You're trying to balance that with revenues, because otherwise, you know, there's implications. If you expend contingency, then you don't have the revenue to do it. You're going to make cuts operationally in other areas in order to support contingent funding. In the general street and fire fund, that's a very challenging thing to do. In a utility fund, it's a little bit different story. You could have some of those contingent funds there because they just stay right in that same fund in the reserve anyway.
Well, that was going to be my suggestion, that before you look immediately to reserves as a first line of defense, that you look at cuts. Where else could you cut to pay for that emergency that came up? And then look at reserves.
It's a possible approach. And there could be, depends on what that emergency would be, you know, how dramatic that cost hit would be.
It's the approach that we all use in our personal finances.
Well, there's a good example where we got caught if we were doing this year is when we had the winter storm at the end of 2008. We had already exhausted our entire, if we were budgeting like we were in 2011, we get that winter storm at the end of 2011. We've already pretty close, kept everything close to the line. We get hit by $100,000 of just trying to keep our streets clear so we can operate emergency vehicles. We don't have that option of not going to reserves because we've already spent everything.
And I understand if we don't have the option. I just want to look at it and make sure that that's the case.
Whatever we bring forward be very specific in nature.
And I know people in this administration do that. I'm very proud of them for doing that. I just want to maintain that philosophy.
And then the last couple slides here talk about the utility funds. And again, we're assuming a 14.5% rate increase in water and sewer pursuant to the FCS study that was presented last year. And fully funding the East Street water line and Zone 4 projects. We're not going to delve into this again tonight just because we have an entire budget workshop on the 11th on water sewer rates and stormwater rates. And I will have FCS actually here to talk about that and present that information to you. So we'll have a lot better understanding at that point versus tonight. But we did provide on the next slide the revenue and expenditure estimates as of right now without that new information from FCS. I'm going to kick it back to Dave.
Okay. Last part of the presentation before council questions and comments and deliberation would be our next steps. And on the next slide, as we've mentioned all along here, we have additional review and revision. This continues to be a moving target. The target is beginning to stabilize, but it was as late as the end of last week. Even after your package was presented, that we got preliminary updated information from the assessor's office. And there's where you can see that in our presentation initially, we had that $150,000 potential impact, which ended up only being a $50,000 impact, at least right now. We'll get the Q3 results solidified and in, and then we will enhance or refine and update some of the revenue and expenditure projections and some of the lines that would be related to the results of those reports. So that will be better informed in our estimates. As you know, we still have that. It was about 250. It's estimated to be now potentially $320,000 deficit. And in spite of significant constraint that's been exercised in preparation of this preliminary preliminary budget, there's still $320,000 deficit in the general street and fire fund. And as we mentioned early on in the presentation, one of the overall approaches is to have that number be as low as it can be as we present that to you. And so we are working with our employee groups on measures that can be taken. One one time in 2011 to help with that effort. We appreciate the conversation that we've been having to date. And then as we move forward, continuing to look at the expense side of this and continuing to sharpen the pencil and see what else we can find in there without reducing services. The approach is to try not to reduce services in the community. So if we can do that, we'll try to do that. Depending upon what happens with the third quarter estimates and what they would do to that projected deficit, depending upon what happens in our conversations with the employee groups, and just all of the other variables that are still moving around, we will have a better look at what that deficit will be and what administration's proposed budget would need to look like for a comfortable use of reserves to balance at the end. And we're hopeful that the next updated information won't go in the negative direction, kind of will go in the other direction. One example, and I don't know that we have information on that until potentially right at your hearing, or even potentially after your hearings, would be around this issue of the excise tax that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where the county commissioners have a question in front of them as to whether or not they want to take advantage of that 20 cents per line increase that the legislature afforded to counties. That if you don't take, you lose some existing 911 funding. So that whole question could be $80,000 to $100,000 in general fund positive impact to our community. And 320 all of a sudden becomes 220 or 240. So it helps, every little thing helps. So we're hopeful it's going to go in that direction, but we may not know that until later. So we're not counting on that, we're not planning for that, but certainly that would be hopeful. We will, as Jen mentioned, be here at our next workshop on the 11th to talk in much greater detail about the utility funds, the whole issue of the rates and what updates are there. It's an update from the last time that presentation was made. We are assuming rate increases on the utility side pursuant to the previous model that you looked at. We will be then back here on the 25th, again in workshop, with the formal presentation of the, no longer be the draft preliminary budget, it will be the preliminary budget. And in at that time, we'll have updates on all of these higher level presentations of fund information, but we will also have an appendix for you, a stack of spreadsheet detail for each department that will have all of that information. But we are not planning to go over that at that time. And then we have hearings in November, after which you would adopt your ad valorem levy. That's gotten very complicated, so by that time we'll have that nailed down for you and ultimately your budget. That's it for the estimates and the draft preliminary budget. I keep using that word and I apologize because it is a moving target. And with that, I guess we turn it back to the mayor and the council for any questions or comments. Deliberation.